Welcome to the Jack Mountain Bushcraft Podcast, episode 123.
Welcome to the Jack Mountain Bushcraft Podcast with your host, Jack Mountain Bushcraft School founder and Master Main Guide, Tim Smith.
I'm your host, Tim Smith. I'm a registered Master Main Guide and have been a full-time outdoor instructor and guide since founding the Jack Mountain Bushcraft School in 1999. We help people become more skilled, more knowledgeable, more experienced, and more confident in the natural world through our bushcraft and guide training semester programs and multi-week canoe and snowshoe expeditions. You can check out the show notes to all of our podcasts at blog.jackmtn.com. If you're interested in learning more about our college-accredited and GI Bill-approved programs, visit the Jack Mountain Bushcraft School on the web at jackmtn.com. And check out our online network and digital learning academy at bushcraftschool.com. Hello and welcome back to the Jack Mountain Bushcraft Podcast. Episode 123. We're going old school today. We're sitting in the guide shack, ridiculously over-caffeinated. I'm joined with Oz and Rick, and we are at the tail end of the 2024 Wilderness Canoe Expedition Semester. And we've been out expeditioning for a month, and we're tired and cranky. But we just wanted to kind of riff on that, on what we've been doing, and talk about how a momentary lapse of focus and concentration can end a trip for a person. How are we doing this morning, gentlemen?
Good.
Doing well.
Doing well. We took off, was it yesterday? No, 2 days ago we took off our last expedition. Yesterday was a day of rest. Everybody was pretty exhausted. I know for me, I woke up reasonably early on sort of expedition mode, drank 2 cups of coffee, fell asleep at 8 a.m., did something for an hour, and then spent most of the afternoon sleeping.
That's about the same that I did.
Yeah.
I slept probably till 8, and then got up for a little bit, ran some errands, took a shower finally, and then went back to bed.
Yeah. And I came back a couple days early from this trip, which we'll get into shortly here. But the day after I got back, I literally slept for 14 hours straight.
I did make it to town yesterday. Like, I had nothing to do all day, but made it to town, like, buzzer shot, end of the day, to go to the dump and go to the bank and, like, do a couple of errands. But, you know, it's like 4:45. I'm like, am I going to make it on time? And I'm looking at myself in the mirror like, you didn't do anything at all today, and you're having trouble making it to town by 5. It's 7 miles away, and I drove. It's not like I walked or anything.
It's all right. At least we were drunk, too.
Yeah. So couple of big trips this past month. First of all, really enjoyed having you guys on the course. Super fun.
It's been awesome.
Yes.
Definitely. And I think all the students really enjoyed having you guys and your level of experience. But 2 pretty different trips. Like, first trip, colder, higher water. Second trip, quite a bit warmer, real low water. I think we pulled paddles out like 2 times on the second trip, and the rest was all poling.
Yeah, I would say it was 98% poling of a 30-mile trip, somewhere in there.
Yeah, it's right around there. Wild.
Yeah, I would say these guys have the poling thing down now, because they had no choice. Otherwise, they didn't get to come home. So these guys are definitely proficient.
It's great what a motivator, like, greasy fried food can be, like, and candy and ice cream. Like, oh, you want those things? We got 15 more miles to go. People are like, I don't care if it's 80 miles, we're going all the way today. There's a great, I should look up which book it was in, but there's a great Sigurd Olsen story where he talks about, they were out in the boundary waters, Quetico, and he said, I think they had 40 miles to go, and he was like, you guys want to push hard and go all the way to town today? And they're like, yeah, and they go to town, and they go out to the restaurant or bar, they get some drinks, they get a bunch of food that they didn't have to cook or clean up for, But then the next morning, one of the guys is like, okay, I had my fill. I'm ready to go back out again. And that's usually how I feel. Like after a day at home, I'm like, okay, the glory that is like fried food and stuff is no longer seems so glorious, and you're kind of ready to go again. But interspersing like one day of the comforts of town with a couple of weeks of living in the forest, I think would be, if they ever figure out that Star Trek tech where you can like beam me up, Scotty, and you get beamed from like some super remote Arctic island where you're kayaking to just some casino with all sorts of greasy food and free drinks, like, yeah,
Oh, yep.
go once a week
Yep.
for a couple hours, and that's enough.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I come back, I usually spend a day gorging on candy. Which is, for some reason, that's been my thing this season is candy. But and then I feel terrible, and then I just want to get back into the woods and feel disciplined again
And not
feel
eat
like
candy.
Yeah, exactly.
Or eat candy in the woods.
I think the trick, because I have similar things, maybe not with candy, but the trick is to not have any reflective surfaces so you can never see your face and feel shame.
That's right.
Ooh, I like that one.
That's
Eliminate them all.
That's right. So on my compass, I got rid of the mirror.
I'm blacking mine out.
One thing, we talked about being tired at the end of the trip, but I think one thing that gets glossed over in the sort of trip literature is just the physicality of it, right? When your body is your only engine that you've got, you just get tired. And it's not necessarily a bad thing, but you sort of know what you're in for. Like, this past month, I'm waking up at about 4:30, first light, and having coffee right away, and then you're just thinking about the day, and by the end of the day, you're just tired, like physically, pulling a canoe all day, wrangling people, everything you do. The only motor you have is your body, and it's just tiring.
I realize now why they didn't have gyms. Back in the old days, like maybe the Greeks did for a little while because they were pretty settled. But,
only the ones that lived in Athens, like downtown, right?
If you're swinging an axe for every meal and paddling or walking for every mile, at the end of the day, thinking about going to the gym would seem pretty silly.
Yeah.
So.
You couldn't get the energy to walk there.
Yeah. It is. But it's also, it feels good, right? Like every aching bone, every aching muscle feels good at the end of the day, and you feel like you've earned something. You've earned that right to sleep that night, right? So you sleep a little bit better, you sleep a little bit deeper. At least I do. And
you've earned that right to go to bed at 7.
Yeah, right. Exactly. That's the truth. I mean, nobody looks at you weird when it's 7:15 and you go, "Well, guys, I'm heading off to bed," because everybody's like, "Well,
folks want to eat dinner at 3:30, in bed at 7." It's like you look at like senior citizens going to the early bird special at the Red Lobster at 4. Why are they waiting so long? Yeah. They're onto something.
So yeah, I definitely understand it. But you also have the benefit of the early morning, and for me, that's kind of where I recharge. I like to wake up in the morning, think about my day, think about what's going to happen that day, what I expect of myself, and I think that's where I kind of get all my energy for the rest of the day. And then at night, I just sort of collapse and go to sleep. So, yeah, I love it.
Yeah, I'm usually the opposite. I usually go to bed later, but going to bed out here at 8 or 9 is considered late for me. So, yeah, I definitely go to bed earlier. Like Oz said, everything that you have to do out here takes longer, and it takes calories to get it done. So definitely get your workout in the day, and definitely I get my sleep at night for sure.
Big designs. I'm always like, getting ready for the first expedition of the year. I'll download a couple of books, throw them on the Kindle. I'm like, I'm gonna read these 5 books. I think I read a total of 1 page. Like, I'd get in the tent at night, I'd like fire the thing up, I'd like start staring at it and just fall asleep with it on my chest, right? Like, just...
I brought my sewing kit. I have all these ideas for crafts. I was going to carve a spoon. I had all these ideas, and literally, I get back here and I feel like, am I being a bad neighbor? Because I don't even want to hang out with Rick sometimes. I just want to like sit in my tent and like nurse myself and drink water and go to sleep, take a knee. You know? So it's, it's definitely a pace that you feel, but it's a great pace, and it feels good at the end of the day to me.
There's just something about it. Obviously, it really agrees with me personally, because I've been doing this, my whole adult life. But as much as we're saying like it's physically challenging and arduous, like it just feels good. To be with a small group of people in a remote environment working towards a shared goal, like, man, there's nothing like it. Yeah, I love it.
Yeah,
I wish that modern life was more akin to that than what it is.
I have no doubt that we talk about inside jokes, right? Like each class will have its own inside jokes, and I was saying the other day, I feel like probably within tribes there were inside jokes that were hundreds of years old, right? Because that's the way they traveled, and they were always in small groups, small families, and so they weren't exposed to a lot of outside influence. So these inside jokes were probably a 300-year-old inside joke, and that was probably pretty awesome existence.
Yeah. Not to make it overly hokey, but I think that's what we're recreating, is that like the idea of like a small family unit or a small tribe when we travel. All right, it does sound hokey as hell. Forget it.
I 100% agree.
I think it ties into the whole group dynamics. Like, you move as fast as your slowest person. You start to learn people's strengths and weaknesses in that group, and you start to function as like a little mini community.
And we also, one thing I like too about this school is there's no real separation between us and the students, especially when we're out, right? It's not like we separate ourselves from them. We eat somewhere separate, or that everything's always a lesson, right? We hang out, and by the end of the course, it's kind of like you're just teaching your friends, right? If there's anything left to teach within the course, right? By that point, they're kind of on autopilot and doing their own thing. But that's something I like, is that you're always assimilated with one another, and you're always doing the same things, and the students aren't cutting all your firewood while you sit there and tell them they're swinging their axe wrong, right? Like, we have to go out there, and as soon as we're unloading our own canoes and getting our own canoes up, we're out getting one or two sticks of firewood. We're out having to do all the same things they are. So that's one of the things I really love about being here. So,
although I did just see online like $1,000 British, I think it's a Voorhees expedition chair, and I was going to get a couple of them, and then like me doing anything on trips is over now. I'm going to sit there with a smoking jacket and a pipe and just direct. That megaphone, that antique megaphone thing I showed you guys that my mom got in an antique store, I'll have that.
Are there handles on the chair so we could carry
I
it
hope
around?
I hope so.
We'll just mount you to 2 canoes.
But lest we put out the idea that it's all fun and games when we're in the field, it's not all fun and games. We had an episode, an incident, if you will, this past trip, where we had to evacuate somebody. And we just wanted to break that down, like, in talking about the upcoming Main Guide Medic course that's coming this fall. We wanted to talk about like the thought process that went behind how did we decide, or I should say, how did Rick decide that yes, we need to evacuate this person, and how did we make that happen? So yeah, it really just takes like a momentary lapse of focus to end a trip for somebody. And in speaking with this individual, we won't name this person just for the sake of not shaming anybody, but one of our big questions whenever we're using edge tools we have a whole bunch of very particular safety parameters, but the big safety parameter you always ask yourself is this safe? Is what I'm doing safe? And this person said, I knew what I was doing wasn't safe, and 1 second later there was blood everywhere. So
she said, I literally asked myself, is this safe? And then I said, no, and did it anyway.
And then there was blood all over the gravel bar. So it's always a terrible thing when you're guiding a trip or just on a trip, and then you sort of hear through the grapevine someone's injured, someone's cut themselves, and I have a story about that I'll tell in a bit, but let's break down this situation. So I think the three of us were all in the woods at the time, and the gravel bar was like 40 yards away, so you get the word, oh, so-and-so sliced the hell out of their thumb. And go. I think you managed the whole thing from start to finish, Rick, so you can kind of fill us in.
Yeah, sure. So one of the students came over and said another student had cut their finger, and it was bad. So this is the second time in a year, 2 different classes where somebody's cut themselves, and I hear this is bad. So went over, and they were applying direct pressure, which was good. Had them remove the direct pressure, and instantly knew that they needed stitches. It was a pretty significant laceration across their thumb, and we had to make some decisions. So, I stopped the bleeding and went and talked to Tim and kind of laid out the options of what we had in front of us. She definitely needed to go to the hospital to get stitches, but it wasn't a life, limb, or eyesight type situation. So it wasn't a situation where we needed to hit the SOS button on our Garmin's. So I don't know if you want to talk about like the decision making on the evac process. Tim knows the area way better than I do, and that was a good lesson that I learned, is really knowing the area that you're in and finding pre-designated areas that you could pull someone out in case of a evacuation type situation.
Yeah, we were in the middle of the North Main woods. We weren't near a road. We were just camped on a gravel bar on a remote river, and not the Allagash, not the West Branch of the Penobscot, so there were no rangers or anything. So, and it was it like 5, 6 p.m. kind of time of day?
5 o'clock. Yeah.
So we weren't going to throw somebody in a boat and paddle like hell for town, because we were still, 26 miles from town. And the water was low. So, it took us another 2.5 days to get to town. So, but I knew we crossed a bridge like 6 miles downstream, and I knew because it was the Memorial Day week that there'd be people camped at this one campsite by the bridge, and I figured we could bribe them. Oz always travels with like 8 bags of candy, and we could bribe them with candy or money or whatever to get people out to get. I think that spot by the bridge, that campsite's only like, it's less than 15 miles down a woods road from Ashland, so. We pulled up and were able to convince somebody to give you, Rick, and the injured party quick ride to town where we had a car waiting, and then. Yeah. So we're sitting there in camp thinking, like, weighing out all the options, and we're thinking, okay, is this person gonna? Is it, like you said, was it life, limb, or eyesight?
Yes, that's kind of the criteria the military uses for like an urgent evacuation. So.
And it didn't seem like that was the thing, so we monitored it for the night. We checked it again, or you checked it again the next morning. Then we pushed on, thinking and the plan was to reevaluate when we got to that bridge, which was right around middle of the day the next day, like lunchtime. Yeah. Rolled up to this remote campsite, and two big RVs there, and talked to the people and just explained the situation.
Yeah. So, the plan, after we knew that we weren't going to be able to evacuate them that night, the plan was just go into a wilderness medicine, and big thing is stop the bleeding and then keeping it clean. So I just went into the cleanup mode and cleaned it up, redressed it, and that next morning reevaluated. And as soon as I pulled the bandage off, it just started bleeding heavily again. So that just kind of confirmed the decision to get her evacuated.
I think it's a good jumping off point just to talk about how safety with tool use is kind of everything. Week one of the expedition 4-week program, we spent a lot of time on tools, tool safety, using an axe, using a knife, all those things, because what we're trying to avoid was this situation, right? Like once you're in a remote environment and someone gets hurt, like basically if they're hurt badly, trip's over. But we're just trying to get that person out so they don't lose a life, limb, or eyesight. Nobody wants any. No, we all are hoping that nobody gets hurt in the backcountry because the trip's over, and it negatively impacts everybody in the group. So I think that's the coming at it from like a safety perspective. Like, what do people need to know to use a tool safely before we're in a remote environment? Because modern people often poo-poo that, because most people in the United States anyway, most people are like 15 minutes from a hospital. But when we're, in a remote area, I mean, that's the definition of wilderness medicine.
Yeah.
Like, no help is coming. You're on your own. How can you manage this?
Yeah.
We were fortunate to be able to have an evac option the next day, but the more remote you are, probably the more time and energy you should spend on getting your medical skills up to speed. So a friend of mine lives remote in New Brunswick, Jeff Butler, if you're listening. I remember once he said his line was, the further you live from the fire department, the more money you should invest in fire extinguishers. And I was like, yeah, that's pretty genius. And it's pretty true. Like, the more remote that you're going to be, the more, the less access you have to definitive medical care, the more time and energy you should spend on developing that skill set in yourself.
I think probably a lot of students get bored right at the beginning. Maybe not bored, but right at the beginning they think, I came here to go canoeing, and why are we doing all this axe stuff? And why are we doing all this safety stuff and knife stuff? And I think that quickly becomes evident when they start having to swing that axe every day for every meal. And, I think it quickly becomes evident when, everything they do takes these edge tools. So, it's something that we take for granted, but, they're probably the most necessary skills you can have. And the line between getting it right and getting it wrong right has a pretty serious repercussions.
That line in the sand is covered in blood.
Yeah.
Literally. Yeah. I mean, this was a really good lesson learned for me on just the importance of having some medical training, a person with medical training in the group, especially the wilderness medicine, because things change from urban to backcountry medicine, and this was a perfect example. I learned stuff. I know I'm going to make some modifications. I'm going to have way more wound management equipment in my first aid bag. So, I've learned something every time I go out, and I love this stuff. So it's been an awesome month, and just want to say thanks to Tim for letting me come up and play for the month. Really enjoyed it.
It's great having, your medical skills, in my opinion, second to none. I think we know, or I don't know if I said this on the podcast, I took a wilderness emergency medical technician course back in 1996. And that was so long ago that in my first aid kit, all that's in it is leeches. So whenever anybody gets hurt, throw a leech on them, throw 3 leeches on them. So it was neat to see sort of the modern...
and cocaine.
Cocaine and leeches. Although I had that leech on me this trip. I had a leech on my foot, and I pulled it off, and man, I didn't stop bleeding.
We had
for
to put a tourniquet on it.
It was like 3.5 hours. My whole foot was covered in blood. It was crazy.
It was pretty serious.
Great story on leeches, though. That is where they got the drug Coumadin, which is like a blood thinner. They synthesized it from what leeches... Because when a leech bites you, it puts that drug into you so that your blood doesn't clot, so they can suck your blood all day. But leeches get a bad rap. There's nothing really bad about them. Like, they don't carry disease. They just look awful. Like, when you look down and you see a big leech on you, you're like, oh my God. But it's not like a tick that's going to give you Lyme disease or something like that. They're pretty innocuous.
Yes.
Except when you're, bleeding for 3 straight hours afterwards. Anyway.
Pass
so,
out in your tent.
Yeah, right. Low blood volume. So we'll probably, wrap this podcast up. But if you're interested, if you want to take your wilderness medical skills to the next level, we've got, I think, just a handful of spots left on fall 2024 Main Guide Medic course. And, we're going to basically be using a lot of these things that we've seen in the field over the years as jumping off points. Like, here's what you're probably going to need to manage, right? Lots of knife cuts, lots of upset stomachs, lots of, hopefully no axe cuts, but or chainsaws or whatever. But we have that course coming up, designed specifically for working guides, for people who are in the field in remote areas. That's the whole gist of why we're doing it, is to make people, better trained, better able to manage things like that. And again, it'll be slightly different from kind of the modern cookie cutter approach to wilderness medicine that you get when you go everywhere else, because we're going to base it on things that we've seen in the field and, managing those things for the long term. I think the subtitle of the course is, what if no one else is coming? Wilderness medicine is sort of designed around the package them up and get them to a doctor. But, when you're pretty remote, like, maybe that's a day, maybe that's 5 days away. And how do you keep the person alive and not lose life, limb, or eyesight as a result?
Yeah.
So yeah, I guess we'll wrap this one up. Thanks again, guys, for humoring my desire to record these things in the morning when I'm all jacked up on caffeine.
That's been absolutely great, Tim. It's been an honor.
And a super fun month. And thank you, guys. Pleasure working with you.
Thank you, Tim.
Pleasure here. Thank you, Tim.
Okay, you've wasted another bit of your life listening to us prattle on about semi-useless things. So if you like this, you can subscribe, but we'll hit you back soon with another one. Have a good day.
Take care.
Take care.
You have been listening to the Jack Mountain Bushcraft Podcast. For more information on our professional wilderness guide training programs that are college accredited and GI Bill approved, visit us on the web at jackmtn.com.